So this video might end up being a rant. I typically have had trouble, focusing during the day to make these videos. So this is just filmed pretty late at night. But it is something I've been thinking about throughout the day, especially given a lot of what's happened with regards to sports. I listen to Clay Travis and Outkick the Coverage radio show, as well as the podcast that he has on YouTube. And I can tell you that, it's a very bad situation when people are apt to listen more to shows that are belly aching about sports than the actual sporting events themselves. And I had an argument earlier with someone who, I've known for a while. He's been on this channel. I actually went on his channel earlier this week, and it was a pretty, testy argument. But mainly, it had to do, in my opinion, with the actual value of sports in American society. And before I keep going, I just want to make sure you can click the subscribe button below and the notifications bell if you're on YouTube. Of course, if you are on BitChute or on Library, you don't necessarily have to click those bells because you don't need it, because Library doesn't hide your notifications and BitChute doesn't hide your notifications. So please subscribe to me on BitChute and Library if you can, and you can be part of the discussion. And I actually was thinking about doing this as a live stream, but simply, the time that I'm doing it at would make it pretty ridiculous. In any case, so a while back I did a book review on a small book called All About the Beat by John McWhorter, where the subtitle is Why Hip Hop Can't Save Black America. And the main issue that he was bringing up was that you have a lot of these people who think that they're making very deep statements through their music, and in reality, their actions and the shallowness and cliched nature of what they're saying illustrates that they're really not going to go anywhere. And this book was actually written, I think, in 2007. You can see right here. It was written before Obama came into office. So yeah, June 2008. And you can see that it's been 12 years, and it was just a drop in the bucket whatever hip hop and R&B stars have attempted to do for America. And you still see some of them pretending that they're out there to change the world, like Jay-Z and John Legend and people like that. Obviously, Chrissy Teigen, who I don't even think is black, but maybe I'm wrong. And these are people who think that they have this civic duty to constantly tweet out their political opinions, and that's in the performance art arena. There's people in all of the different entertainment sectors, whether it is, let's say, theater. You have the people from Hamilton, and you have musicians. I mean, Billie Eilish was just at the DNC. I think also Billy Porter, who is this Broadway performer, and I think he's a playwright, was at the DNC. And they all seem to think that by virtue of their having success in the arts, they're going to make a deep impact for either America as a whole or specifically a community that they have in mind. And the ones that I would say are most susceptible to this type of, tease is, I would say the black community is the worst of all of them. But you also see it somewhat in the Jewish community. You have people like Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who Seinfeld I think was an amazing show, but there's no reason Julia Louis-Dreyfus would be a person who gives real substantive opinions about anything, right? She's a actress, and I don't even think she does stand-up comedy. She's just an actress, right? She's a comedic actress. So you have this issue where in some of these communities, entertainment figures are seen as good prisms with which to indoctrinate whole sectors of that audience with various political ideas and political affiliations. And I see it being effective in some ways, and then I think the effect has diminished sometimes, but it never totally goes away. And it's in my mind, it's a very effective way of corrupting entire identities and communities, and that's why I like to think of political thought as being something that transcends so-called communities. I think a lot of these communities are an illusion. Do you really think that Mexican Americans like they they wake up in the morning, they read a news story, and they try to curate their reaction to it based on what the Mexican community as a whole thinks about it? I don't think so. And I'm specifically using the example of the Mexican community because yes, there is like a large activist contingent within the Mexican community, but you don't see necessarily like a lot of Hispanics and Hispanics at large and Mexicans specifically. I would say they don't really they don't care about the political back and forth as much as the politicians would like them to. That's why they're trying to mobilize the vote. They're trying to get in with the Latino community, and it's been in many cases sort of it's had mixed results. Yes, the Democrats who are the most focused on harnessing the Latino vote have had some success, but I would say in the past few years it's sort of slipped through their fingers because I think that there is a little bit of a more practical mindset among some of these people who they don't necessarily see these politicians as being people who will deliver anything meaningful to them. And maybe it's because if you're talking about people who immigrated to the United States from Mexico, they have a little bit of a more jaded view on public officials where they say, well, these people, they're very dishonest and they don't necessarily have the best interests of their constituents in mind, so I'm just going to ignore them. I think it could be something like that. Or if you're talking about Mexican Americans who maybe have been here either for many years or they're a few generations after the immigration here, that then they don't look at politics as an identity issue. So they sort of know how to shop between or read between the lines or shop smartly. And those are the ways that I think people ought to look at politics, that you can be an informed consumer. And the problem is that when you're looking at sports, being an informed consumer sometimes means that you don't really have any choices. So if you're a person who has been, let's say a track and field fan or somebody who's into tennis and things like that, individual sports, I don't think it's necessarily that difficult to continue to follow that sport because after all, a lot of these athletes sort of come and go, and there's not too many people with staying power. Obviously, Serena Williams, yes. Roger Federer, yes. But everybody knows that people play a tennis match or a golf tournament with the mind of winning the purse, right? And the bounty of that purse is commensurate with the level of public interest. So a golf player, right, a golfer knows that if they were to do something to diminish the prestige of the sport, the purse that you would pick up from these golf tournaments would be reduced. And the same thing with tennis, the same thing, I believe, with NASCAR to some degree. And I think that's fine. I think it's fine for people to, I guess, look out for the best interests of their competitive field. And what is really worrying to me is that both the fans and the athletes are losing they're losing the focus on what's best for the sport and for the world at large when it comes to the big team sports, basketball, football, baseball, and hockey. And if there's any other ones you might want to throw in later that I forgot, like the WNBA. I know a lot of you are WNBA fans, right? Of course you are. In any case, yes, those team sports have become so bloated and corrupt, and the people who continue to watch them, and yeah, I could end up watching. There's only one team that I've really been obsessed with since I was a kid. Yeah, the Dallas Cowboys. I still look at the scores for the Chicago Cubs, but I haven't really watched that many games. But the more you inject political bullshit into these games, while at the same time the sports themselves, there's all these players who have domestic violence issues, right? There's all these players who have addiction problems, or they have issues with their finances and idiotic habits that they have, like Le'Veon Bell. And yet they see themselves as a portal for transmitting the values that they think the country should adhere to with respect to public safety and policy, right? And you see this happening most especially with what's going on with the George Floyd and now the Jacob Blake situations. And I don't have to tell you that most Americans know that when you get some kid who is, he's an all-American athlete, and they go to college and on a scholarship, and they play for, let's say, 3 years at the University of Oregon, and then they get drafted into the NFL. You're not talking about a deep thinker with polished and nuanced ideas about what to do in America. So when you see them, like what happened back in 2015, and these are examples, I mentioned earlier Clay Travis. Clay Travis has really carved out a niche for people who are, they're just honest about what's going on here. He pointed out in his book that there were these athletes in St. Louis who they were playing for the Rams, and when the whole Michael Brown incident went down, Ferguson riots and all of that, they came onto the field with their hands up, and they were talking about the hands up, don't shoot thing. And yet, in the actual Department of Justice investigation under Eric Holder, who was President Obama's Attorney General, it was found that that narrative that Michael Brown had his hands up when Officer Darrell Wilson shot him, it was found that there was no evidence of that the witnesses who testified to that they did not have reliable testimony, right? Because they contradicted each other. Many of them had, some of them were saying, oh, he was running away from Darren Wilson. Other people were saying that he was standing in place, and other people, and it wasn't consistent with the physical evidence, meaning the ingress and egress of the bullets through his body, right? So people don't understand that slogans and different, slogans and epithets and things like that, hands up, don't shoot, are meaningless when it comes to the hard data and science and physics of solving solving a situation, solving a crime, analyzing what happened, right? And obviously, if I was to come and say, well, for sure, because he was a police officer, there's no way that he would shoot somebody with his hands up, If I would have said that before the investigation was over, people would rightly condemn me for prejudicially exonerating the officer, right? Because that's the meaning of having prejudice, that you have a preconceived notion of the outcome before you find out the real facts. And that's really the problem that we're seeing with the major team sports in America. You have these people who they jumped out, and this is something, again, going back to the show Outkick the Coverage and the website. So Clay Travis has a collaborator, Jason Whitlock. Those of you who are sports fans probably remember Jason Whitlock from Fox Sports, and maybe even earlier than that, he was with ESPN. He was with the Undefeated. And Jason Whitlock, I didn't think it was such a big deal when he signed with Outkick, but I think I was wrong because it turns out that his perspective on the events is informed by both a deep understanding of Black American literature and culture, as well as, I guess, a very a very studied way of stating himself. So he talks a lot about how a lot of these athletes, and this has become cliched, so it's getting a little old, but still, when he first said this, I thought it was a very profound way of saying it. He says they're out over their skis on a lot of these issues, and what this really means when you're out over your skis is that, well, you've sort of jumped the gun. You've really you've climbed up the wrong tree. And I don't think you can say climbed up your own the wrong tree, because now people would probably think, instead of thinking that it's because a dog chased a squirrel up a tree, they would say, oh, well, what kind of animal lives in a tree? And they'd say, oh, there's a racial connotation to it. But what Jason Whitlock is talking about is that you have these people who are very uninformed, and they don't have necessarily a sophisticated way of looking at the world. They're very addicted to social media, and they're also seeking the approval and adoration of society at large, and they're just obsessed with that, and they can't let it go. And that's really why, not because of the issue of police shootings, and not because of the poverty and the real lack of leadership and direction in the Black community specifically, and maybe other underprivileged communities. They're not concerned with that. They're concerned with earning the media and public adoration for supposedly courageous stands on certain issues. And the reality is that if it was such a courageous stand, then they would probably be seeing within the media and within the league and within more visible sectors of society, they'd be seeing a little bit of pushback and resistance, but they're not. And it's very difficult to realize what the utility is of having someone like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's playing for the Bucks. The Bucks were just, by the way, I think they were just blasted in the playoffs. They lost 4 out of 5 games and got eliminated by who was it? It wasn't Toronto. It was Miami. So and I was just stunned, right? So this is supposedly the best team in the NBA, and because of the Jacob Blake situation, they did this bogus so-called strike where they decided that they're going to protest the shooting of an attempted rapist, right, by police officers who had resisted arrest and been very unruly and had been harassing and even sexually molesting an underage girl. They decided that was a cause worth protesting one of their own games and not playing. And then like I guess 2 days later they reversed it, and it was something that the entire world laughed at, because they could see that these people are very shallow. The only reason they reversed their stance was because they knew it would pretty much torpedo their entire season. Many of them would lose money. Some of these people, yeah, obviously a lot of these players are making major amounts of money, but we don't know what debts that they have. We don't know what financial commitments they have, some of them aren't making that much money. Yeah, they're making money relatively high salaries compared to you or I. But the problem is that their passion for changing the world is not proportionate to their desire to live a very luxurious lifestyle and be basically, having the entire world jerk them off like they're getting a happy ending all day. That's really what these athletes are about. They're about basically having the world, be their sexual playground. Okay, and I'm talking about all the athletes, right? Even the athletes who don't care and don't pretend to care about the the justice and peace of the world, right? The fact of the matter is, a lot of these people, sports is something that I've loved and had, a very abiding interest in for a long time. And yet, why is it that I don't buy into this? I know most of you, if you're in my audience, don't buy into it yourself. So I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal here. But one of the reasons that I never bought into any of this garbage, that I haven't become like this soulless, idiot who buys into the virtue signaling, is because as much as I used to every day that I could turn on TBS and watch the Braves, or turn on WGN and watch the Cubs, or for a while there was local broadcasts of the Cleveland Indians, or if there was a basketball game, obviously I'd watch football if I could. But besides that, I usually would take a lot of time to read books, books about all sorts of different topics. And the more you read long form, long form stories and things that go into sort of the minutiae and the different, you get into the weeds of things, you start to realize that there's details that contradict the rosy picture that the media tries to portray. Because when you have a column that's only 750 words long in a newspaper, or you have maybe a commercial featuring an athlete, which obviously is not, they're not going to feature an athlete and say, oh, Odell Beckham's Jr. is dog shit, right? By the way, Odell Beckham Jr. There is a story about him related to some various embarrassing bodily functions out there. So I think I'm gonna keep it, sort of just broach the topic because I don't want to touch it so much. But the fact of the matter is that you have these athletes; they're not really in touch with you know this notion that you learn a topic and go into depth, and then maybe you comment on it, right? Or you approach a topic, you maybe try to analyze it a little bit, and then you sort of, you engage with your opinion, right? So even though, like, let's say I watch a lot of hours of tennis and I watched all the games with Rafael Nadal, and I watch all these matches with Naomi Osaka or whoever it might be, who herself is like a BLM protester now. Now I could watch all these tennis matches, or I could watch all these golf tournaments with Rory McIlroy or whoever, and yet I'm still not an expert on golf, and I probably couldn't, get through an 18-hole round of golf. I couldn't get through a 9-hole round of golf because my experience is limited just to being a spectator, right? So the majority of fans know that their expertise is very limited to being a spectator. Maybe once in a while they get to play, or they did play in the past, pick up basketball games or football on Thanksgiving, before the NFL games start. And of course, there's always these blowhard fans that think, oh, I know better than the coach, I know better than the general manager. And sometimes they do, but the fact is that they're still sitting there on their couch, and the coaches and general managers are sitting in those offices and making tons of money. So yes, there is a lot of delusion that goes into being a sports fan, but it's harmless delusion so long as you don't get too carried away, right? But I'm thinking that the breaking of the spell that has tied the American fan to sports has really been, it's been very sudden. I've met people and I know people. I've known people for a long time who now are telling me, well, we're not going to really watch any of these games. I can't really trust these people. There's no real attachment to the games, especially the NBA. They're playing, of all things to call this facility where they're playing this in Orlando, they're calling it the bubble, which obviously connotes the term that they're isolated and unable to be, you can't reach them and they can't reach you, and yet you're supposed to just accept what they're saying. It's just it's perfect. It's perfect for people to look at and say, well, this is definitely not something where I can agree with these people because they're removed from the situation, they're poorly informed, they're consuming media that just validates their worldview without any sort of feedback that might be, contradicting their view of the world. And they really think this is what's stupid. There are people who still think, for example, that the NBA, it's a smart decision to embrace the BLM movement because they think that the big target audience of the NBA is the black community. When in reality, if you really think about it, who buys the loge seating at NBA arenas? Right, the sky boxes and all of that. Who buys all of the NBA packages in terms of the people who are the and what is it, NBA League Pass or whatever? Who buys all of the big premium products that are offered through NBA endorsements and things like that? Well, in some cases they're rather rich people that are, in some cases they're white, some cases obviously they could be Asian or black or whatever, but you're not talking about an urban audience like people think that the NBA is going for. The small consumer, the people who are buying the shoes, the people who might be buying some of the soft drinks that are advertised by the NBA, yeah, the black community is part of that, but you're not marketing, just like they didn't market hip hop music. Yes, it was specifically with black African American themes and things like that. But you think that when white kids would walk into record shops, CD shops back in the 1990s and buy a CD of Bone Thugs and Harmony or whoever it might be? Let's say it was KRS-One. I think that might be a bad example, but one of these hip hop acts of the 1990s, Warren G or Snoop Dogg, and they have like very heavy gangster rap themes. Do you think that Snoop Dogg's sitting in his studio anywhere and he's like, man, I hope that it's not going to be white people who are consuming my product, because that would obviously be a missing the mark. That's not really who my music is going for. No, because the whole purpose of all of this, from the very beginning of the entertainment industry, has been to make a lot of money, right? It's always been about selling an illusion to the fan, to the consumer, and making them think, oh, this is somebody with an experience that I want to be a part of, right? So it's the same thing with sports. It's the same thing when sports sponsors some of these unhealthy products that don't actually help you to live a better life. And who among us is not guilty of buying some of these soft drinks, or maybe some of these cookies that might be advertised, or what? Like, the truth is that if you watch NBA broadcasts or broadcasts of any of these sporting events and you look at some of the choices of products that are advertised, I don't think that you can look at them and say honestly that this is promoting the athletic lifestyle. And if you're looking, like, let's just focus on some of the consequences of just the bad diet. So these are statistics. They show that Hispanic and non-Hispanic adults have a higher prevalence of obesity than non-Hispanic white adults in 2015 to 2016. So it's 47% for Hispanic and 46.8% for non-Hispanic black adults, compared to 37.9% of white adults in 2015 through 16. And then in 2011 through 2014, so this is a different study, the prevalence of diabetes, right? Rest in peace, Wilford Brimley, was 18% in non-Hispanic black adults. So think about it that way. Almost 1 in 5 black adults had some form of diabetes. So I think, what is there, 3 types of diabetes? Maybe it's 2 types, I don't remember. 16.8% in Hispanic adults and 9.6% in non-Hispanic white adults. So whatever the case is, okay, yes, you can point maybe at hereditary issues. You could point to maybe issues of you know, non, maybe it's the other lifestyle choices, like the occupation, or the way, I'm saying like their work occupation. So in case people are misreading what I'm saying, there are other reasons people could have diabetes, but obviously it doesn't help if you have a poor diet. I've worked kind of hard to cut sugar out of my diet as much as much more than I can, than I used to. Still eat some cereal, usually a couple days a week. But yes, I would say that if you are somebody, an athlete who is promoting things like Sprite, and LeBron James is a big sponsor of Sprite, or if you're one of these people, these soft drinks are they're just not good for people, period. And then if you're saying, well, your target audience is the black and Hispanic community, then you're having, I think, by the way, that um it's a little strange. I maybe I'm a little isolated, but I don't think that the Hispanic community is particularly interested in what's going on in the NBA anyway. So it could be obviously that the athletes don't have much of an influence on this, but they're definitely not helping by endorsing these unhealthy products that have high sugar and high calories, and in some cases carbohydrates and things like that. We need to start talking about how athletes can actually help people, because they're not going to change. Police are not going to want to be better people because a forward for the LA Lakers is telling them, or because a quarterback is telling them, or some tennis player like Naomi Osaka, right? People choose to change their behavior because they might have some sort of life-changing event or moral epiphany. But if it, in some cases, it could drive them in the wrong direction. Like there was just this resignation wholesale of senior police officers in Rochester, I believe it was. So I would say the bottom line of today's discussion is this: sports is not going to save Black America or America at large. Okay, just like John McWhorter. Again, I can't recommend this enough. I actually tried to get him as an interview subject, but this was actually before the latest BLM outbreak, and I still couldn't reach him at the time. And I probably will never be able to interview him because he's become a very, very in-demand guest on full-on TV shows and things like that. I think he's been on, what is it, CNN and Good Morning America recently. So if you have the chance, please read this book, All About the Beat, because it goes into the same issues with regards to hip hop and R&B music as I'm talking about with sports. That you have these people, yes, they're talented. They might be able to um, you know hit a double and steal some bases in baseball, or they could be someone who they can get after the quarterback in football, or they can drive to the paint in basketball. but they're not really making any profound statements in terms of the public discussion. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can also find me on all these other social media platforms that you see behind me. If you're watching me on YouTube, please subscribe and share. BitChute and Library also, I really would appreciate it. Even if you're subscribed to me on YouTube, find me on those other channels. I prefer you to actually watch me on those channels, on Library and BitChute, than on YouTube. Also on Minds.com and Subscribestar, if you want to donate on Subscribestar, and on Parler and Gab as well. And I'll talk to you later.